You're listening to the Let's Be Real podcast. Now, here's your host, Andy Hughes.
Our guest right now is an inspiring leader in so many ways. In addition to writing a few fantastic books, she is the CEO of the Wiseman Group, which is a leadership research and development firm. Her book, Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter, is a New York Times bestseller, and her book, Rookie Smarts, Why Learning Beats Knowing in the New Game of Work, is a Wall Street Journal bestseller. She has been listed on the Thinkers 50 ranking and in 2019 was recognized as one of the top leadership thinkers in the world. We're so excited to welcome Liz Wiseman to the Let's Be Real podcast. Liz, thank you for joining. How are you?
I'm well, Andy. Thanks for inviting me on.
You know what? We're so thrilled to have you. I was just thinking about it earlier. Your book, Multipliers, was one of the first examples that was brought up of, maybe a guest that we could bring on, and it really inspired the whole idea of the Let's Be Real podcast. So like I said earlier, we're just so excited to have you on. So thank you for taking some time with us.
Oh, well, certainly. And, given that your podcast is called Be Real, I feel like you've got to ask me all the hard questions about multipliers. I feel like we've just got to really pull this thing apart.
We certainly
will. And like no holding back, ask me all the hard things.
I have all the hard questions lined up here. So no, we're always trying to be real, and that's an important thing to do as a leader. Now, I think at the beginning of each episode, what I like to do is I think it's important for our listeners to hear about each leader's journey. Could you tell us a little bit about your path to becoming, the author that you are and the CEO of the Wiseman Group?
Some people describe a circuitous path to get what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Mine is very much a circular path. I feel like the work, I love the work I do. I love being a researcher and an educator. I love teaching people about leadership. I get to do it all around the world. That's great. But strangely, what the work I'm doing now is the work that I wanted to do right out of college. And it's like I've come full circle. So I graduated from college and I wanted to teach management. I wanted to teach leadership. I had done an internship for a training company down in Southern California. And I really wanted to teach leadership. And it's funny, I went out and applied for a job and it was with Zanger Miller. And they were the premier management training company at the time. And they're like, you know what, you seem great. And we just love that you want to teach leadership, but if we can offer you a little bit of career advice, was why don't you go get some leadership experience before doing that? You'll probably be better at the job. Now they use much more diplomatic terms than that, but so I went from this wannabe management educator to then I took a job at Oracle, which funnily it was my second choice. I really wanted to go work for this management training company, but as a second choice, I went to work for this young, maverick, rapidly growing company where I just got thrown into management. So then it's a growing company and it's really successful. And so I just got swept up in the growth of Oracle, which meant for all the people who joined in those high growth days, it meant a lot of career growth. So I got lucky in that I got thrown into leadership. I think I was 24, 25 when I got put in charge of training for the company. And, I'm protesting wait a minute. I'm not ready to be the boss. I haven't worked long enough to know how to be a boss. And they wanted me to go start Oracle University. And I had absolutely no qualifications for this job, and I kind of tried to point out to people, I really can't, aren't there any adults around who could do this? Aren't there any experienced people? You're giving this job to a kid. And they were actually doing that on purpose. And I think that was part of Oracle's strategy back then was, let's just hire a bunch of young, smart people who don't know what they're doing, and they won't know that what we're doing, what we're asking them to do is either A, impossible, or B, unrealistic, an unfair burden that we're placing on these young people. So anyway, I just got all this experience leading, and I was leading an education organization, and I did that for 17 years at Oracle, literally never having a job
Wow.
that I knew how to do. Everyone was this like stretch challenge, and it was thrilling until I started to feel like I knew what I was doing. And then I decided to leave, and no one could figure out why I was leaving. In fact, there was a guy on my team, Amit. I love Amit. I won't share his last name, but Amit said, Liz, like you're leaving the corporate world is such a waste of your talent. I thought that was so interesting. And I left and kind of put up a shingle to do work as an executive coach. And my first two clients were Apple and SAP. So I got to do that work at some really, really interesting places. And from there, started to notice some things that I had been wondering about and struggling with in my days as a leader, and seeing a lot of leaders, and did some research, wrote a book not because I had always dreamed of writing a book. I just wrote a book because I had done some research and had something to say. And you either like stand on a soapbox in Hyde Park, or you write a book. So I wrote a book, and now I've kind of I've developed, I guess, a bit of the author gene. I told my publisher at the end of Multipliers, I said, wow, I actually really like that. Most people describe it as a horrible process. I really enjoyed that. I think I've kind of got the writing bug. And she goes, oh no, you've got the writing gene. So that's what I'm doing. So, it's funny because I'm back to doing the very thing I wanted to do. How many years ago? Like 30 years ago, coming right out of college. So my career has been a wonderful circle back to the start. Yeah, which, of course, reminds me of that T.S. Eliot quote. Maybe it's coming to mind for you, but it's like something about like the end of our journey is to arrive back to where we started and to know the place for the first time. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like I kind of know a little bit about how to teach leadership now because of that big circle.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And one of the questions I had was, is that something that you always wanted to do? But it is. And I think that is really cool that, you're able to look back now and say, wow, I'm able to do what I really wanted to do all those years ago. Now, when you originally got that job at Oracle out of business school, could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the challenges that you faced, or some of the lessons that you learned? Because I'm sure, going into that job so young, and everything was so new to you. What were some of the things that you learned during that time?
Oh, it was nonstop learning, which was why I eventually left, because I didn't feel like I was in that nonstop learning mode that honestly I had gotten kind of addicted to. Like, I never meant to stay at Oracle for 17 years. My plan was work there a couple years, then go get a PhD. And it just was a really thrilling ride, but I faced all sorts of challenges. I don't know that anyone's ever asked me about that. So Andy, if you don't mind, I'm going to use this as a little bit of a therapeutic moment, because I don't know that anyone's ever said, like, what were the challenges you faced? And I mean, I think the first challenge I faced was surrendering what I wanted to do for what the organization needed to do. Mm-hmm. And, I remember this moment when I had been at Oracle about a year. I'd done a good job with the job I was hired in, and there's a reorganization. So we were all kind of like moving around, finding new jobs. And I'm interviewing for this job at what would become the corporate university, this training department. And I'd been working there for a year, and I could see that a bunch of people were being thrown into management without any kind of training, that there are a lot of kids like me that were getting thrown into management, not totally knowing what they were doing. And so, having wanted to teach management and having gone to business school and studied organizational behavior and worked for a management training company as an intern, I was interviewing for this job, and I proposed to my would-be vice president that this is something I could help with. And I was excited because there was a clear need, and I thought I could help with this. And he listened to me, and he said, Liz, like, that's great. And like, we think you're great, and we're excited to have you on this team, but that's not our big problem right now. He said, we've got to figure out, and your boss in particular has to figure out how to get about 2,000 new college grads out of the top technical, out of the top technical programs and top universities into the company and up to speed on the Oracle technology stack really fast. And basically what he described for me wasn't a management training problem the company had. It was a technical training problem. Mm. And he said something to the effect of, well, what would be great, Liz, is if you helped your boss solve that problem. I'm like, really? Like, oh, okay, like, whoa, I went to business school and I know some things about managing, and I mean, maybe, and like, this might be like advice to anyone who's like writing a resume. I think I had written on my resume that I had taken a Fortran programming class in college, and I had worked as a TA in the computer lab in the business school. But really what I help people do is like figure out just how to like boot up the word processing programs for them to write their papers. And I don't know if they thought I had technical skills that I didn't really have, but I could see very clearly that what I wanted to do was not what was needed. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't what was most important to the organization. And I don't know, maybe I was just smart enough to know that this is something that you need to surrender to. Like, rather than sort of push your interest, your passion onto the organization, just pay attention to what needs to be done and go do it. Like, I kind of come to call this like, learn how to just make yourself useful. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, I'll do that. And it wasn't like I was taking a job. It was that I was saying, I'll go work on that. And I signed up to teach programming to a bunch of hotshot programmers who had come out of the top technical colleges of the top universities in the nation. Mm-hmm. You know, people with like PhDs in like even AI back then, and you know, electrical engineering grad students and CS majors. And I'm now teaching them like the Oracle procedural like languages. And like, this was an enormous challenge. I still consider this the maybe the biggest accomplishment of my career, was just saying yes to this and then learning how to do it and staying just like a notch ahead of my students and what I was teaching them. And fortunately I had a wonderful co-instructor who was properly trained in programming. But I think that was like the biggest challenge I faced, is learning to get over myself and do what was needful. And, you know, strangely, it became this almost like this philosophy that I had across my career, which is perhaps the way to be most valuable, is to just do the work that is most needed. Mm-hmm. And I think because of that, and it certainly wasn't like charm or good looks or, you know, IQ points on my part, it was, I think, this orientation that caused me to keep getting all of these opportunities. Mm-hmm. Like it was, but that was hard to give that up. It was hard to be underqualified for my job. It was hard to be put into management at a young age and leading people so many years older than myself. It was hard to be thrown on like executive teams where I'm the youngest member of those teams. And, you know, in some ways it was hard to be quite often the only woman in the room in those kinds of management meetings. But that's what made the work so much fun.
Yeah, I love, you know, you make a lot of great points there. And I love what you said about, you know, being addicted to learning. And, you know, when you're put into a situation like that, you're kind of forced, you know, to learn, you know, I mean, I'm sure that was a little intimidating, just trying to, you know, train all of those people that went to school for that, you know, programming and all those things. But at the same time, you had an opportunity to learn so much. And then eventually, you know, you probably got to a point where that stopped, and then you got comfortable, and then you're trying to look for the next challenge. So how important is that, just having that attitude and, you know, always trying to learn things? Because I think if you're not learning, then it may be time, you know, to look at something else, or, you know, maybe you need some more motivation.
Well, there's, I think, a line from my book, Rookie Smarts. I'll probably misquote myself in this. How bad is that when you misquote yourself? But it's something to the effect of, yeah, I think I've got it, is the critical skill of the century is not what you know, it's how fast you can learn.
Yeah.
And I really do believe that deeply, is that when we rely too heavily on our expertise in the things that we know, that not only do we stagnate in the work, meaning, we fail to innovate, we miss things going on in the market, but we also, our careers stagnate and we become irrelevant. And I don't mean irrelevant as a human, but not, and maybe irrelevant is too strong of a word, but non-relevant to the work at hand. And there's as I was doing the research for the Rookie book, one of the things I was looking at was our ability to manage information and how fast information becomes obsolete. And when you look at the STEM industry, so science, technology, engineering, math, or medical related fields, and you look at the rate at which information is increasing, like there's more and more data coming at us. And of course, companies like SAP are to thank and to blame, for just this massive amount of data we have available to us. And then you consider the rate at which that data becomes obsolete, like it's no longer true. So we're not talking about like enduring philosophical truths, but like, basic data and science, that when you put those two together, what I found was fascinating is that in 5 years, so if you project out 5 years from that, only about 15%, so that's not half, but 1/5, between 10 and 20% of what we know today is going to be relevant in 5 years. And of course, we don't really know which 15% that is. And so when you think about that, and particularly those people who work in industries that are heavily fueled by technology, enabled by technology, like it is the critical skill. And, I feel like there's two ways you go about it. Is you either you've built for yourself professionally and personally a wonderful learning discipline. I don't know, you stripe certain parts of your week for learning, you read books, you kind of do this dedicated and intentional or like purposeful learning. That's a great way to do it. That's not the way I usually do it. That's like the disciplined way to do it. I usually take the lazy approach to this, which is I just say yes to jobs and opportunities and assignments that I really don't know how to do. And it forces this learning discipline. So I'm really kind of a lazy but ferocious learner.
No, I love that. And I think the Rookies book is amazing. And if you haven't checked it out already, definitely check it out. We'll put a link to all of the books in the description of this episode. But I like what you say, in Rookies, you kind of talk about how if you're a rookie, you're desperate. You don't really have a choice but to learn. When you come into a new opportunity, you have to learn. And I think when people start to get comfortable, maybe they see themselves as an expert, some of that innovation kind of shuts down and it can create some blind spots. And I just love that. I thought that was so interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how really you kind of almost in a way have to find those opportunities, like you were saying yes to something that you've never done before?
Yeah, I think I could sum up the book in really one idea, and that is what we found is that when we are new to something that is both important and hard, like it drags us into a certain way of operating. And that way of operating, what struck me is when I did all the interviews and the surveys and the analysis, and I looked at how we behave when we are in rookie mode, new to something important and hard, is the set of behaviors that it provokes are all the behaviors that we're trying to get in the workplace now. Like we tend to be curious, we ask questions, we are empathetic, we are agile, we operate lean, we keep things simple. And so I was just so struck at when I like really looked at that list, and I thought, oh, this is the exact same list essentially that companies are out there trying to teach across their workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you can either try to inculcate and retain this way of working despite your success, your experience, or you can just keep yourself and others in that rookie space, legitimize that way of working. It's a humble and hungry, fast and agile way of working. And so I think that's the big idea. And I think there's maybe a couple sentences in the book. I think I buried in that book the most important data I found in the research. You know, in hindsight, I probably should have like just put it on the cover. Is we went out and did a survey. This was about 1,000 professionals that we surveyed and asked them a number of questions. And we correlated the answers to 2 of those questions. One question was, what's the degree of challenge in your work today? Yeah, like, you know, on a scale of 1 to 6 or something. And then in a separate question, we asked, like, how satisfied are you right now in your job? When you correlate those 2 together, you get almost a perfect linear correlation, like almost a coefficient of 1, because what it tells us, what the data shows, is that as challenge level in our jobs goes up, so does our job satisfaction. And as challenge level goes down, so does our job satisfaction, meaning like not only are we good when we're in this space, we like it. And I don't know that we like it when we're like at the very bottom of that learning curve or feeling sort of that maximum stretch of a stretched assignment. Like that feels pretty miserable. We feel desperate. We're frustrated, but it's that process of mastery of learning and achieving and closing that gap that feels really, really good to us. And, you know, maybe that's why we're so good in this space, because it makes us happy. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, for managers, like it is one of the things that multiplier leaders tend to do, but I think it's like a simple practice, maybe even a hack for managers, is if you want to drive job satisfaction up in your department. And I know SAP has some measures like that, measuring engagement and such. Like a fast way to drive that up is to give people a greater degree of challenge in their work, you know, and make sure you size that stretch right, that it's not so difficult that people collapse, fail, you know, publicly and miserably, or never start because it's ridiculous, but just enough stretch so that it, you know, it's slightly terrifying, but doable. That it causes engagement to go up, learning goes up, satisfaction goes up. Like most people like working in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's super interesting. And the other book, you know, you mentioned it, Multipliers. You know, when I saw, you know, the book and had a chance to take a look at it, I was amazed and really inspired. And I started thinking back to my career, and I noticed that it's on the list of essentials for Justin Bieber as well. How about that?
Did you see that?
I did. What a moment.
Is it because you and I are linked on social media, or because you follow Justin Bieber?
I actually saw it on your Twitter. I saw it and I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's just so cool.
I have to tell you about that. So it's like 11 o'clock at night, and my daughter, who's in college, she sends me this snap of Justin Bieber's Instagram post or stories. It's a series of images, and it ends with his like essential reading, 3 books, and one of them is Multipliers, and my daughter sends it to me, and I think she's punking me. And I'm like, yeah, right.
It's photoshopped.
Like, well, and she's at UC Berkeley, and she's taking one of their decal courses, one of the student created, like this democratic learning, these courses in Photoshop. And so I know she's in a Photoshop course this semester, kind of for fun. And so I assume she's punking me, and I'm like, hey, you know, good skills. And it turns out it was real. Yeah, that apparently Justin Bieber read Multipliers and considered it, I don't know, I think essential for maybe his development where he is right now in his life, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And we actually, we interviewed Justin's vocal coach on this podcast. So we have a couple of connections here with Justin, but I mean, it is a fantastic book. And just for those people that haven't had a chance to read it, you talk about two different leaders in the book, a multiplier versus a diminisher. Would you mind defining each one of those and what the key differences are?
Well, a diminisher is a leader who is often really, really smart and capable, but they have an effect on their team where other people aren't smart and capable around them, that the way they use their own intelligence and know-how and talent has this diminishing, dampening kind of effect on others. Like basically they're smart, but people around them don't get to be smart. Like they shut down intelligence in others. And the idea really came from this observation I had at Oracle. I'm like, wow, I work around such brilliant people. And some of them are so brilliant though, that nobody else seems to be brilliant around them. Mm-hmm. And I ended up studying this and then later calling these leaders diminishers. And I contrast that to leaders who are also smart and capable and talented and have know-how, but somehow they use their intelligence in a way that amplifies the intelligence of others. They become multipliers to the intelligence of the group. Like they're smart, but they work in a way that people around them get to be smart as well and get smarter and more capable around them. They're leaders who use people's intelligence and then grow it. There really are no strategies for turning somebody else into a multiplier leader. Like I wish I had them because everyone would want them. And,
yes.
In fact, when the book first came out, I got so many inquiries to the website, people saying, hey, could I arrange to have a book anonymously sent to my boss? And at first I thought this was so fun. And my husband and I would laugh at this. We just thought that, well, what a great thing. We should do this. We should create an anonymous book. And then once we thought it through, we're like, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Because you really can't will somebody. I mean, I think we all know this. Like I have personally never, ever been successful trying to change somebody else. I mean, but heaven knows I've tried. I mean, I've tried and failed at this a bunch of times. And, and I'm lucky in that I got thrown into management at a pretty young age where I tried this a bunch of times and it didn't work. And like I had enough runs around the track on this that I figured out, wow, it's a whole lot better to use people for the capabilities that they have rather than try to contort them into your dream employee. Like, well, if you just were good at this, you'd be great at this job. Yeah. I've learned to say, you know what, you're great at this. So let's have you do this thing in your job. And it's much more satisfying. But, the reality is we don't really get to change anyone else. The only person we really get to change is ourselves. So there are dozens and dozens of really effective strategies for how to become more of a multiplier yourself. When it comes to how, and we can talk about that, but, and I think maybe the first strategy for that is to know that you're probably not going to change them. 2 is to know that most of the diminishing that's happening is not coming from tyrannical, narcissistic, bully-like diminishers. Like those people exist in the world. They are definitely the minority in the corporate space and, in nonprofits and others as well, that most of the diminishing is coming from what I call the accidental diminisher, meaning the good person, well-intended, wants to be a good boss to her team, really cares about his people, wants to do the right thing. They read management books, they go to management training programs willingly, or they're people like me who write management books, who have the best of intent, but so much of what we've been taught to do in the past, like now put in the context of the current world of work, is very, very diminishing. So part of dealing with a diminishing boss is knowing that most of it is accidental. Now, there probably is someone listening here who's like, not my boss. Like, I have an evil boss. And you know what? My guess is you just might. If that's what you're thinking, that might be true. And they do exist. but most is accidental, which changes your strategies.
Absolutely.
Which is it's probably partly what, your grandma or grandpa taught you years ago, which is, just assume the best intent.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done that a lot throughout my career, is think, what was that person intending to do? And for me, I have this little advantage in this exercise in the work world, is because I am the I'm the child of a, kind of a multiplier mom and very much a diminisher dad. And I think I learned at a very young age that although my dad kind of said and did things that felt like put downs, I don't know what it was, but for some reason, even as a little girl, I could just see that's not what he means. Oh, he loves his kids, and he meant to say good job, but that's not what came out of his mouth. And I just learned to see his goodness and his good intentions. And I think because I got that training at a really young age, and I ended up with a lovely relationship with my father throughout my life, but I had to interpret his behavior. There's probably some psychologists listening going, okay, that's super messed up, but, and maybe it is, but I've applied that to the work world. And I would encourage anyone who's stuck working for a diminisher or with a diminishing colleague or with a diminishing spouse or roommate, is to look what is their best intent there. And sometimes to help them see that they're not, with that strategy, they're not getting what they intend. And then there's a whole bunch of strategies for dealing with the diminisher. And boy, there's a chapter in the book. I did a second edition of the book where I did a whole research project just aimed at figuring out what is it that we tend to do in coping with diminishers. Does it work? And if not, what can we do differently? And the short answer is most of what we do that is intuitive, keep micromanaging bosses at bay, kind of stand up to know-it-all leaders, try to give feedback to controlling bosses that they need to back off. Most of that actually, not only does it not work, it very much exacerbates the problem. Because think about it, Andy, what happens when you try to keep a micromanaging boss out of the meeting? Or tell, a controlling boss that you're really in charge.
Yeah.
They tend to double down. They insert themselves more and with greater degrees of control and insistence and adamancy about what they know to be right. And what I found is that actually the strategies that very much work are some pragmatic things, just turn down the volume on it, meaning, you know what? It's not for the rest of your life. It's just for a time. And, turn down the volume on that feedback from your boss and maybe turn up the volume on the feedback from your colleagues and your clients and your peers. And then a whole set of strategies around managing up in a way that is really multiplying up. That it's about, and Andy, this actually came from one of my experiences at SAP, where I was coaching an executive there who was working for a very much a know-it-all, diminishing kind of leader. And he was struggling with this, and he wanted to be a good leader. And I think I asked him this question. I asked him, have you thought about the possibility of you being a better leader to your team than your boss is to you? Could you actually be a better leader than your boss? And because we have this subtle notion, in the work world, that somehow the best bosses, the best managers rise to the top, and that we're supposed to do the thing our boss does, that leadership behavior cascades down. And that's probably what a cultural anthropologist would tell you would happen. But I think it's a choice that we make to copycat that behavior. And I see people all the time choosing to be better leaders than their environment, better leaders than their boss. And once you decide to do it, it kind of just works. And it's deciding to be a better leader to your boss than your boss is to you. And it does not change the person, but what it does is it changes the dynamics profoundly, and it changes your relationship with that person. And they may still be a know-it-all micromanager, but they're probably not going to micromanage you. Like, you will have earned some space and some trust. And the sad thing is they're probably going to go micromanage your colleagues, which is a shame. But yeah, there are things that you can do to help people make that transition if they wanted, or to deal with that diminishing in a way that still creates room for you to do your best work.
Yeah, and then, you know, having that attitude can certainly change that culture very quickly, which is really cool. I love those strategies that you just brought up there with dealing with the diminisher. Now, let's focus on the multipliers. I mean, what are some things that multipliers typically do well, you know, to spread their knowledge and create an environment where everyone is getting better? I don't know, maybe if there's like 5 things that multipliers do well. What would those be?
You know, I found the 5 domains that they do very differently than diminishers. The first is how they manage talent, and they tend to be talent magnets, whereas diminishers are empire builders. And the thing that they do differently there is instead of trying to like hire a bunch of smart people, they look for what people are smart at. You know, instead of, like, one of my favorite multiplier questions is shifting from asking, is this person smart, to in what way is this person smart? That's the first thing. The second is the environment they create. Whereas diminishers tend to create a lot of stress in the environment, multipliers create a lot of space and safety. And, you know, if you're familiar with Amy Edmondson's work from Harvard on psychological safety, you know, they create not only psychological safety, but they create intellectual safety, where people feel safe to disagree, to speak out, to tell the truth, to be ethical, to take a risk, to fail in a responsible way, you know, and to recover from mistakes. That's the environment they create. The third is the way they set direction. Multipliers tend to give challenges, where diminishers give directives. Diminishers tell people what to do. In some ways, they spread their knowledge, but the multiplier asks questions. Like, they tell us and they ask more. And of course, in asking more questions, they get more weigh-in, they get more buy-in, they get more ideas around them. The fourth difference is how they make decisions. Decision making is kind of the key skill of diminishers. They're good decision makers, but they make fast and inner circle decisions. Whereas these multiplier leaders, they tend to be debate makers, meaning, and not always, they're not always consensus oriented. In fact, in the end, they usually make the final decisions with competence. But the reason why they can be a good decision maker in the end is they are really careful about understanding which are the decisions of consequence. And on those, they don't shut their door and make that decision with a small group. Those are the decisions they open up. They put public, essentially. Like, they say, here's the issue, we're deciding between A and B, here's why it's important. They invite people to come to that debate prepared with evidence, with data. They let people weigh in. Those are hard-hitting debates. But they run that debate in a way that doesn't tear down a team. It actually unifies a team. And there's some really thoughtful ways they do that. The last difference is the way they execute, they implement, they drive for results, like how they get results and get things done. And, you know, diminishers tend to be micromanagers. They get it done, but they're operating at the task level, doing so much of it themselves. Whereas the multiplier leaders, their big distinction is they put other people in charge. They give other people ownership. Mm-hmm. I call them they're investors, because they tell other people, like, this is yours. And they give ownership and the accountability that comes with that ownership, just the way an investor would. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we find that they get, you know, with the big research finding that came out of the study was that these multiplier leaders get at least, you know, twice the capability of these diminishing leaders. Or another way to look at this is that when you follow the path of diminishing management, which I should say is the path of least resistance, like it's easier to lead this way, that you're going to get a fraction of the intellectual horsepower of people who work for you. Like they'll come in wanting to give it all, but you'll probably only like reap a fraction, less than half is what we found in the research.
That's interesting. And those are really great. Each of those things are so important to becoming a multiplier. And another thing with the with multipliers, I feel like there's been some type of misunderstanding. Like I think I've seen some people think that, being a multiplier is hands off and it's like a soft leadership style in a way. And I don't necessarily agree with that. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that you've heard as well?
It has. And I have to admit, I don't know if it's frustrated or sad when this is how the ideas are interpreted, because it could not be further from the truth. And that this multiplier way of leading, it's not this hippie way of managing. Although I have to say, I'm a native of California, so like probably prone to hippie thinking, but it's not this like, hey, you know what? Do whatever you want. Like,
right.
Just sort of apply yourself, find something useful, do it, go big. Woo. It's not this way of leading at all. It's a very hard-edged, hard-hitting way of leading. So much so that when I sent the manuscript off to my publisher when it was done, it was the first time my publisher was looking at it end to end. She wrote back, and she, among a number of things she said, one of her big wows was like, wow, these are not cupcakes and kisses kinds of leaders. She could see that they had this hard edge, and that, yeah, they have this kind of, and maybe I think Andy and anyone was like, here's how I would capture it is, I think what these leaders do is they manage this duality. And if I could sum the whole book up, I'm going to sum it up into 2.5 words. So some people are like, oh, maybe I'll read it. Like, if you're really not going to read the book, let me give you 2.5 words to carry with you. And that is safety and stretch. See, they have this side that you could see as soft, empowering, enabling. Like they create a safe place for people to work, where people feel valued, where people have room to disagree, to maneuver, where people know what's going on, where the rules are clear, where like there's some norms and consistencies. Like they trust people, they extend that kind of trust. They care about people often. But that's just the table stake. That's just creating a great place to work. Like it's a crime to create a great place to work, but then never ask people to do great work. Mm-hmm. And that's where this hard edge comes in, that they challenge. And that's, I sum it up with the word stretch. They give people stretch assignments. They put other people in charge, and they hold them accountable. They have high expectations. It's like they see talent. Like, okay, I get it. Like, I see that you're smart, that you're capable. I acknowledge it, and I want it. I want all of it. And so they are these very demanding kinds of leaders. I don't know about you, Andy, but all of the multipliers I worked for, and this might be an Oracle thing, they were all people who were hugely demanding and had extraordinary expectations of me. They were people like Ray Lane for me was this enormous multiplier. Like I would do anything like short of like immoral or illegal or unethical to live up to Ray's the expectations he had of me. Like he asked me to do things that were like irresponsibly hard. And then he just never stepped in and did them for me. I once asked Ray, I was doing the research for the book. I went back to Ray, and Ray served as a president of Oracle for a number of years. And I went back and said, Ray, like, why is it that you never stepped in and micromanaged your team? Now, these people are all running like multi-billion-dollar businesses, but he said, well, Liz, you know the answer to that. And I'm like, no, I really want to know, like, why did you never step in and do that for other people? And he said, because if I did, it's not their failure anymore. It's a failure of leadership. But very much I see it as this hard-edged way of leading, but you only get to be demanding and challenging is if you first created enough safety and trust in the environment where people trust your best intentions. They're like, oh, Liz isn't asking me to do this hard thing because she wants me to fail. She's doing it so I can have the satisfaction of being successful and learning and growing. That's the safety and the stretch working together. Like when leaders can combine those two things, magic happens.
It certainly does. Safety and stretch. I love that. I love that whole concept there that you just talked about. And Liz, man, this has been so much fun. Last question for you: where can people find out more information about what you're up to and all of your books?
Well, let me see. There's some websites. It's pretty easy. If you just Googled any of the terms, it would pop you somewhere useful. But let me see. The books, you could go to multipliersbooks.com because there's a couple different versions of the Multipliers book. You can go to rookiesmarts.com. You could go to the wisemangroup.com. I'm pretty easy to find on social media, at Liz Wiseman. I just started Instagram, and Andy, you're going to laugh at this. I had an Instagram account that I just let sort of languish there for a time, but then as soon as Justin Bieber tweeted out thing about multipliers, I went and set up an Instagram account.
He recruited you.
I follow one person right now. I follow Justin Bieber, so I have yet to really get an Instagram presence going, as might be obvious. But yeah, you can go find me on Instagram. I'm going to get around to posting something there, and LinkedIn, and I think there's a Facebook page.
Awesome. Well, Liz, I can't thank you enough for joining us here on the Let's Be Real podcast. Your books are fantastic, and I really enjoyed this. I feel like we could go on for hours about certain things and topics, but again, really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk with us.
Well, Andy, thank you for the invitation, and I guess thanks for keeping things real in the workplace, because that authenticity is what allows people to do their best work.